Chapter 3: The Anatomy of Bitcoin. The Bitcoin White Paper. On August 18, 2008, the domain bitcoin.org was registered, and in November of that year, Satoshi Nakamoto posted a link to a white paper entitled A Peer-to-Peer Electronic Cash System on the cryptography mailing list at metsdao.com. Satoshi Nakamoto has never definitively released his identity, and it is unknown whether he is one person or even a group of people. In January of 2009, the first implementation of the Bitcoin code was released on SourceForge. That same month, the Bitcoin network came into existence when he mined the first block and encoded this message into the Coinbase, which is the first transaction data in a Bitcoin block. The Times, 3rd January 2009, Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks. It is believed to be a reference to the hazards of fractional reserve banking. How does a Bitcoin transaction work? As previously explained, a Bitcoin transaction is, in its essence, a message telling the network to debit a certain amount of coins, the outputs, from one Bitcoin address, the address being derived by hashing the public key, and credit those coins, inputs, into another Bitcoin address. The sender creates the message, attaches a transaction fee to pay the miner to incentivize the miner to encode the transaction into the next block, then encrypts the message with the corresponding public key. A miner is just someone running the software that processes transactions in the network. The message is then sent to the mempool, which is a data bank stored on the nodes, servers, of the network for transactions that have not yet been confirmed. It's kind of like a limbo place for transactions that are waiting to be put on the next block, the stairway to heaven. A miner will then attempt to create a block. A block is a group of validated transactions that a miner attaches to the blockchain. The blockchain is exactly that, a chain of chronological blocks that are mathematically linked to one another. On average, a new block is created every 10 minutes. To create the block, the miner creates a transaction data table from particular transactions cherry-picked from the mempool. The first transaction in the data table is called the Coinbase, not to be confused with the US-based exchange that acquired the same name, which is one component of the total compensation that the miner receives for successfully creating the block. Currently, the Coinbase is valued at 12.5 Bitcoin. However, the reward decreases every 4 years. In 2009, the reward was 50 Bitcoin. In 2012, the reward was halved to 25 Bitcoin. In 2016, the reward was halved to 12.5 Bitcoin. And in 2020, the reward will be halved again to 6.25 Bitcoin. This is how a Bitcoin is created out of thin air. The Coinbase transaction allows the miner to create these Bitcoins and credit them to a Bitcoin address controlled by the miner. The second component of compensation that a miner receives is the transaction fees attached to every transaction. Naturally, the miner wants to maximize profit, so he first selects the transactions with the highest transaction fees from the mempool and directs those transaction fees to be paid into a Bitcoin address he controls himself. He also checks that each transaction is valid, that is, each Bitcoin address actually exists and has adequate funds to complete the respective transaction, because the network won't accept newly mined blocks that contain invalid transactions. The block size is limited, so the maximum number of transactions that a miner can fit into a block is about 2,700, depending on the average size of the transactions, which works out to about 400,000 transactions a day. The current block size situation has changed somewhat and will be explained in more detail in a later chapter. Once all transactions have been selected, the miner attempts to solve the block. This is where the magic happens. An important computational process to comprehend regarding mining is hashing. Hashing is a process of plugging a given data set into a hashing algorithm. In the case of Bitcoin, the NSA invented SHA-256 that outputs a unique alphanumeric 64-digit number derived from the unique contents of the dataset. For example, inputting the word hello into the SHA-256 hashing function results in the output 185F8DB32276186FC938B2E264306EC304EDA 5180007D1764826381969, whereas inputting the word happy into the same function results in 725AC7B5A8C757275675FD, while inputting HELO results in 3758C389CA3Fe146E5CC8B7E. Every dataset has a unique SHA-256 hash output, and adding, deleting, or changing just one character, as we did with hello, or even one bit, will create a completely different hash output. One could create a unique hash for one word or another unique hash for the entire Library of Congress. However, provided the data is not identical, no two dataset inputs will create the same hash output. Thus, the hash becomes a unique fingerprint for any given volume of data. The Bitcoin program also sets a dynamic difficulty target, which is a number. Expressed as a decimal, it could be something like 16,307.420938523,983, or expressed as a hex 58 number, 0x000000004004CB0 followed by 47 zeros, which the miner converts into a 64-digit number. To compose the block, the miner creates a Merkle root hash, hashing all the transactions in a tree-type structure from the data in the transaction data table that contains the Coinbase transaction and the validated transactions he has collected from the mempool. The miner then creates a candidate block header by inputting all the block header fields, metadata, for the new block he wants to create. A header is a part of a document or a data packet that carries metadata or other information necessary for processing the main data. The block header fields include the hash for the previous block header obtained from the blockchain, the transaction table Merkle root hash, the difficulty target, and a nonce, which is just a random number. The freshly assembled block header is then hashed. This is the new block hash. However, the rules of the Bitcoin software stipulate that a valid block hash must have a hash that is less than the difficulty target value. If the block hash that the miner creates is more than the difficulty target, then the block is invalid and won't be accepted by the network. However, changing the nonce value changes the result. Thus, the goal of the miner is to keep on trying different nonce values until a block hash is found that is less than the difficulty target. While many mainstream media organizations that don't understand Bitcoin will state that miners are solving complex mathematical problems, essentially all the miner is doing is repetitively guessing nonce numbers until they or another miner are able to complete a valid block that has a hash value that is less than the difficulty target value. Once a miner discovers a valid block hash with a value that is less than the difficulty target, he relays the block to the network to be verified. Each mining node will verify that the transactions in the new block are valid and the winning miner's calculations are correct, then accept or reject the block accordingly. If the block is accepted, it is added to that particular node's blockchain. Once over 50% of the network reaches consensus and agrees that the new block is valid, the new block is immutably hard-coded into the blockchain, which is replicated on every node. Because transactions in the new block are now part of the blockchain, the record of the block reward and the transaction fees for the block are also on the blockchain, but recorded as transferred to the miner's Bitcoin address. The transaction fees are thus no longer controlled by the previous owner, the transaction sender. The next time the miner opens up his Bitcoin wallet, the Bitcoin balance function will check the current balance of the miner's Bitcoin address on the blockchain online and update his wallet balance accordingly. One must recognize the genius of the economic incentives and competition that are built into the system and how they are influenced by the fluctuations in the Bitcoin price. First of all, the transactions will only be included in a block if the transaction fees that accompany them are competitive. From the birth of the Bitcoin network until recent years, mid-2017, the 1 megabyte maximum block size stipulated by the code wasn't fully utilized, so miners were incentivized to include even transactions that had low transaction fees, less than 5 cents, and sometimes even free if the miner was feeling generous. However, by mid-2017, as more and more users started to acquire and use Bitcoins, the fees started to increase. Increased competition meant that users began to compete to get on the next block by offering higher and higher transaction fees. By the middle of December 2017, the average transaction fee on the Bitcoin network had temporarily risen to $55. Miners are also competing against each other in order to beat the competition to solving the next block. Miners have costs, electricity, hardware, rent, and labor, and as the market price of Bitcoin rises, profit margins increase. However, more profit means that miners can increase the investment by increasing their computing power to increase the probability of them solving the next block. This means buying more mining rigs, using more electricity to power the extra rigs, hiring more staff to maintain the equipment, and renting more space to store the rigs. However, as the computing power at the miner's disposal increases, miners start to discover blocks more quickly, and the average block time starts to decrease. To counter this tendency as the price of Bitcoin rises, the Bitcoin software has a built-in safeguard to maintain the average block time of 10 minutes. To do so, as block time decreases every 2,160 blocks, approximately 2 weeks, the program automatically increases or decreases the difficulty by adjusting the difficulty target value in the block header. The formula used for this is new difficulty equals 20,160 minutes divided by total time elapsed during the last 2,160 blocks. 20,160 minutes is 2 weeks expressed in minutes. The Bitcoin protocol also dictates that the new difficulty target cannot be more than 400% greater when compared to the previous difficulty target, or be more than 25% less when compared with the previous difficulty target. This whole mining process is called proof of work, and it is an essential component of the blockchain system. The purpose is to make it difficult for any dishonest party to alter the transaction records stored on the network. Because mining is based on probability, the laws of probability prove that on average, a certain amount of computing power electricity and effort must be expended in order to solve a particular block. If a dishonest party wants to alter a record from the past, they are confronted with two insurmountable problems. First, all of the blocks in the blockchain are linked with the hashes of the previous block, forming part of the inputs for the hash of the block that follows it. If someone wants to alter a record from, say, 2 years ago and debit $100 worth of Bitcoin from one Bitcoin address and credit that $100 worth of Bitcoin to their own Bitcoin address, they don't only have to perform the computational work to solve that particular block from 2 years ago. They also have to perform all the computational work for all the transactions on the blockchain that follow the block right until the present. That's a lot of proof of work to redo. Second, once the bad actor has redone all the proof of work in the blockchain, they need to have it propagate through the network and achieve consensus that this new blockchain that they have just created is the real blockchain and not an imposter. Of course, all the mining nodes on the network have a copy of the original blockchain in their hard disk memory, so they will immediately recognize the imposter and reject it. Thus, the only way the imposter blockchain can be accepted by the Bitcoin network is if more than 50% of the mining nodes on the network vote that the imposter blockchain is the real blockchain. To do so, the bad actor would have to purchase enough mining rigs to take more than 50% of the network. Currently, the cost of doing so for hardware alone is estimated to be over $8 billion, and electricity costs would be more than $5 million per day. Furthermore, the attack would need to be accomplished within the 10-minute block time stipulated by the rules of the Bitcoin protocol. Otherwise, a new block will be created on the real blockchain, rendering the imposter blockchain to be a shorter, invalid blockchain, and thus rejected by the rest of the network. As you can see, the proof of work is one of the key features of blockchain technology, ensuring the security and immutability of the entire blockchain. Unfortunately, one side effect of this proof of work system as the price of Bitcoin has increased has been the ability of miners to add more computing power and thus expend more electricity in competing to discover blocks as their revenues have increased. Miner revenue has been boosted even further by users having to pay higher and higher transaction fees as they compete for the limited block space on the 1 megabyte blocks. Thus, by May 2018, the Bitcoin network was expending electricity at an annualized rate of more than 23 terawatt hours, which is more electricity than Switzerland consumes in a year. Of course, the majority of this power is being used by miners who are just attempting to solve blocks and not even necessarily pocketing the block reward and transaction fees. Miners are just playing a probability game where each mining rig is just occasionally able to successfully solve a block. It is little wonder that miners are seeking alternative uses, like heating for the massive amount of heat that their rigs emit. Let's return to our Bitcoin transaction. Depending on where the receiver is on the network in relation to the sender, almost immediately after the transaction is sent and it hits the mempool, it propagates through the network node's locally stored mempool and a notification will appear in the receiver's wallet. However, as the transaction has not yet been validated, it appears as an unconfirmed transaction on the wallet's user interface. Essentially, what this means is that the transaction is still in the mempool waiting to be confirmed. Once the miner has successfully added the transaction to a new block and the block is accepted by the other nodes in the network as valid, the wallet will then label the transaction as confirmed. The miners subsequently start to mine the next block. Once the next block is validated by the network through the same process, our transaction is confirmed again. Each time a new block is added, the transaction receives another confirmation. The more confirmations a transaction receives, the more confident one can be that the transaction is valid. More confirmations also increase the immutability of a transaction as more and more proof of work is built on top of a transaction. More confirmations mean more proof of work that a bad actor has to perform in order to game the system by falsifying historical blockchain ledger records and attempting 51% attacks on the network. Most wallets and exchanges require at least 3 confirmations before a credit can be spent in an outgoing transaction. Having said that, until now, instances of unconfirmed transactions later proving to be invalid is virtually unheard of. Next episode of WTF is Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency and blockchain guide for dinner parties. We'll be reading Chapter 4, The Market, and we'll focus on the history of price discovery for cryptocurrencies and the key determinants that influence the market. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't hesitate to like, comment, subscribe, and share this podcast with anyone you think will enjoy it. It really helps us reach a much larger audience.